I never thought of myself as a jealous man. Maybe that was my first mistake. It had been a long day at work, back-to-back meetings, an endless stream of emails, and a boss who somehow found new ways to drain the soul from my body. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the last thing I expected was to stumble upon the moment that would change my life. Our house, a modest but warm two-story home in the suburbs, was exactly how I left it that morning. The porch light flickered slightly, in that way I had been meaning to fix for months. Claire's car was parked neatly in its usual spot. From the outside, nothing seemed amiss. But as I stepped inside, something felt different. The living room was dimly lit, the soft glow of a candle on the coffee table casting shadows along the walls. The house smelled of lavender, Claire's favorite scent when she wanted to unwind. I set my briefcase down by the door, about to call out for her, when I heard it. A voice. No, two voices. I froze, every muscle in my body tightening. The voices were coming from the kitchen. Claire's, unmistakable, soft but weighted with emotion. And another, a man's. I didn't move. Not at first. Instead, I let my feet carry me forward, silently, carefully, until I was standing just outside the kitchen doorway. I stayed in the shadows, my breath shallow, my heartbeat pounding against my ribs like a drum. I just don't know what to do anymore. Claire's voice wavered, thick with something I hadn't heard from her in a long time. Guilt. The man exhaled sharply. I know, baby, but you have to make a decision. You can't keep living this way. My grip on the doorframe tightened. Baby. I recognized the voice now. Matthew. I had met Matthew a few times before. A co-worker of Claire's. One of those guys who had a way of always being in the right place at the right time. The kind of man who held eye contact a little too long, who always found a reason to touch her arm, who smiled just a little too much when he thought I wasn't looking. I had told myself I was imagining things. Now I knew better. I don't want to hurt him. Claire whispered, he doesn't deserve this. Matthew sighed. But do you love him? Silence. The longest, most deafening silence of my life. She didn't answer. I should have walked in then. Should have made my presence known. Thrown my keys onto the counter. Let them see that I had heard everything. But something inside me, something dark, something calculating, held me back. No, not yet. Instead, I stepped away, moving as silently as I had come, retreating to the hallway. I grabbed my briefcase and stepped back outside, closing the door with just enough force to make it clear I had arrived home. I counted to 3. Then I walked back in. Claire, I called, my voice light, casual, as if I had just arrived for the first time. There was a rustle of movement from the kitchen, a chair scraping against the floor, the sound of hushed voices before Claire appeared in the doorway, her face slightly flushed, her eyes wide. Hey, she greeted, too quickly, too brightly. I didn't hear you come in. I smiled. Long day. I glanced over her shoulder. Is someone here? Matthew stepped into view, composed but clearly uncomfortable. He forced a polite smile. Hey man, Claire and I were just talking about work stuff. Work stuff? Of course. I nodded slowly, setting my briefcase down. Hope I'm not interrupting. Claire laughed, but it was forced. No, not at all. Matthew was just leaving. Matthew hesitated for only a second before stepping forward, offering his hand. Good seeing you again, Daniel. I shook his hand. Firm. Controlled. I resisted the urge to break his fingers. You too, I said smoothly. Drive safe. With that, he was gone. Claire lingered in the doorway for a moment before closing the door, her shoulders stiff. When she turned to face me, there was something in her expression I couldn't quite place. Everything okay? I asked, my voice calm, steady. She smiled, but her eyes flickered, nervous, searching. Yeah, just a long day. I nodded. Me too. She hesitated, as if expecting me to say more. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I leaned in, kissed her forehead, and walked past her into the kitchen, acting as if nothing had changed. But everything had. I knew the truth now. And the best part, she had no idea that I did. For the next few days, I played my role to perfection. The devoted husband, the unsuspecting fool, The man who had no idea that his wife had betrayed him. I woke up beside Claire, kissed her good morning, asked about her day, listened when she talked. I let her move around me, studying her every move, every nervous glance, every pause in her words when she thought too hard about what she was saying. It was intoxicating, watching her squirm under the weight of her own deception while she had no idea that I was watching. The first morning after I overheard her and Matthew, I made her breakfast. She walked into the kitchen, her robe loosely tied around her waist, her hair a mess from sleep. She looked guilty, and maybe she was. But guilt is useless when it's kept hidden. "Morning, sweetheart," I greeted cheerfully, flipping a pancake. She blinked, surprised. "You're in a good mood." I smiled over my shoulder. Just thought I'd do something nice for my beautiful wife. "You looked exhausted last night." The fork in her hand clattered onto the counter. "Yeah," she muttered, forcing a laugh. "Just work's been a lot lately." "That's what Matthew said," I commented casually, pouring coffee into her favorite mug. She froze. Just for a second. It was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. "Oh, what else did he say?" I slid her coffee toward her. "Not much. Just that you two were talking about work stuff. Seemed tense, though. You sure you're okay?" She hesitated, then took the mug with both hands, as if it were a lifeline. "Yeah, just deadlines, you know." I nodded slowly, taking a sip of my own coffee. "Of course. Just let me know if you ever need to talk." It was cruel in a way, letting her believe I was the same clueless husband she had always known. But this wasn't about cruelty. This was about control. For the first time in our marriage, I had it. That evening, I came home a little later than usual. I took my time, lingering in my car outside the house, wondering if she would take the opportunity to call him. I wanted her to. I wanted to hear the panic in her voice when she realized I had arrived earlier than expected. I stepped inside, placing my keys deliberately on the counter. Claire, she was sitting on the couch, phone in her lap, the TV playing some show neither of us actually watched. She looked up quickly, her expression neutral, but the way her thumb hovered over the screen told me everything. "You're home late," she said, forcing a smile. "Yeah, busy day." I nodded toward her phone. "Who are you talking to?" She blinked too fast. "No one. Just scrolling through social media." I walked over, glancing at the screen. A blank home page. No messages open. She had closed them in a hurry. "Interesting." I smiled. "Anything interesting?" She relaxed, just slightly. "Not really. Same old, same old." I sat beside her, resting my arm along the back of the couch. And then, I asked the question I had been waiting to ask. "So, when's the next time you're seeing Matthew?" Her entire body stiffened. For a moment, I thought she might drop the phone. She tried to recover quickly, but I saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. "Matthew," she echoed, feigning confusion. I nodded. "Yeah, since you're so busy with work, I figured you'd probably be seeing him again soon." She forced a laugh. "Oh, yeah, probably. Meetings, you know." Meetings. That was a new one. I leaned in just a little, lowering my voice. "You sure you're okay, Claire? You seem tense." She exhaled shakily. "I'm fine, Daniel. Just tired." Tired. Of course she was. Lying is exhausting. Over the next few days, I kept the game going. I paid attention to her every move. The way she hesitated before answering simple questions. The way she checked her phone more often than usual. The way she seemed nervous. Matthew was avoiding me at work. I ran into him once in the break room, and he barely looked at me. "Hey, man," I greeted casually, pouring myself a cup of coffee. He nodded stiffly. "Hey, you doing okay?" I asked, taking a sip. He looked at me then, and for a moment, I wondered if he knew that I knew. "Yeah, just busy." I smiled. "Yeah, Claire's been saying the same thing. You two must be swamped." His fingers twitched. He forced a nod. "Yeah, lot of deadlines." Deadlines. The same word Claire had used. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tell him I had stood outside that kitchen, listening to every single word they had said. Instead, I patted him on the shoulder and walked away. I could feel his eyes on my back the entire time. 3 nights later, I set the real trap. Dinner. I planned everything. Claire's favorite pasta, a bottle of red wine, soft candlelight. A perfect, romantic evening for a husband who was just trying to reconnect with his wife. I watched her carefully as she sat down, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "This is nice," she murmured, glancing at the table. I poured her a glass of wine, my expression unreadable. "I just wanted to do something special for you. You've been working so hard lately." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's sweet." I raised my glass. "To us." She hesitated for only a second before clinking her glass against mine. We ate in near silence. I let the moment stretch, let the anticipation build, and then, as casually as I could, I said it. "I overheard something interesting the other night." Claire stopped chewing. She set her fork down carefully, glancing up at me with cautious eyes. "Oh," I nodded. "Yeah, you and Matthew." Sounded serious. Her entire body went rigid. For a moment, I thought she might deny it, but then she did something even better. She swallowed hard and forced a nervous laugh. You must have misheard." I leaned back, studying her. "Maybe," I said smoothly, taking another sip of wine. "Or maybe I didn't." The color drained from her face, and God, watching her squirm was satisfying. The moment the words left my lips, I saw it, Claire's carefully constructed facade beginning to crumble. She was a smart woman, no doubt about that. If I had confronted her in a fit of rage the night I overheard her with Matthew, she might have had time to prepare a defense, spin a story, maybe even shift some of the blame onto me. But by waiting, by playing dumb, I had backed her into a corner she wasn't ready for. I let the silence stretch between us, watching the war play out behind her wide, dark eyes. 1,000 possible responses flickered through her mind, but she struggled to settle on one. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her wine glass, knuckles turning pale. What do you mean?" she finally asked, voice too careful, too forced. I took a slow sip of my wine, savoring the rich bitterness, before setting the glass down with a soft clink. It was late. I had just come home. I heard voices in the kitchen, and I stopped before coming in. I tilted my head slightly, pretending to recall the details. "You sounded emotional." Claire's breath hitched, just barely, but I caught it. "You must have misunderstood," she said quickly. "Matthew and I were just—" She stopped herself before she could finish. I raised a brow. "Just what?" She hesitated. That was her second mistake. Claire never hesitated when she told the truth. She exhaled, as if forcing herself to stay calm. "We were just talking about work." I gave her a slow nod, pretending to believe her. "Right, work." She grabbed her wine glass, taking a long sip, probably hoping the alcohol would calm the storm building in her head. I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms on the table. "It's funny, though. It didn't sound like work. It sounded personal." She set the glass down too quickly. A few drops of wine splashed onto the white tablecloth. "Damn it," she muttered, reaching for a napkin, as if the small stain was the real problem here. I watched her clean the mess, her hands trembling slightly. "Are you sure there's nothing I should be worried about?" She froze mid-wipe, then slowly lifted her gaze to meet mine. Her lips parted slightly, as if forming a response, but she stopped herself again. That was her third mistake. "No," she finally said. "Of course not." She forced a smile, and I forced one back, but we both knew she was lying. The rest of dinner was quiet, too quiet. Claire barely touched her food, and I let her sit in that silence, let her feel the weight of my words pressing down on her. When we finished eating, she busied herself cleaning the dishes, something she rarely did. Normally, I was the one who took care of them, but tonight, she needed a distraction, something to do with her hands, something to make her feel like she was still in control. I let her have that for now. I stood by the counter, swirling the last bit of wine in my glass, pretending to be lost in thought. Finally, I sighed. "You know, Claire, if something was bothering you, you'd tell me, right?" Her back stiffened. I saw her grip tighten on the edge of the sink. She turned slowly, her smile painfully strained. "Of course." "Good." I said, finishing my drink, because I'd hate to think there were any secrets between us. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. There aren't. I nodded, setting the glass down beside the sink, glad to hear it. I kissed her cheek, soft, slow, then walked upstairs, leaving her alone in the kitchen. She didn't follow right away. When I lay in bed later that night, I listened to her downstairs, pacing the living room, making hushed phone calls. To Matthew, no doubt, trying to figure out what I knew, trying to decide what to do next. I smiled to myself in the dark. Let her panic. I wanted her to. The next morning, Claire acted like nothing had happened. She kissed me before leaving for work, but her hands felt cold against my skin. Forced. Her movements were too rehearsed, her words too careful. She was being extra affectionate, and that was how I knew I had rattled her. It was the little things that gave her away. The way she kept glancing at me over breakfast, as if trying to gauge whether or not I was still suspicious. The way she kept reaching for her phone, checking for messages when she thought I wasn't looking. The way her voice cracked just slightly when she said, "I love you," before walking out the door. It was a test. She wanted to see how I'd respond. So I smiled, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "I love you too." I didn't. Not anymore. Not in the way I once had. Love required trust, and whatever Claire and I had now, it wasn't love. It was a game, and I was winning. That night, I made my move. I waited until after dinner, until Claire was curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone, pretending to be relaxed. I sat down beside her, acting casual, draping my arm over the back of the couch. "You know," I said, keeping my voice light, "I ran into Matthew today." She stiffened. Slowly, she turned her head toward me, her smile forced. "Oh, yeah," I continued, stretching my legs out. He seemed off, almost like he was avoiding me. Claire let out a breathy laugh. "That's weird. Maybe he's just busy." "Maybe," I agreed, studying her face. "Or maybe he knows I heard more than I let on." Her expression didn't change, but her fingers clenched her phone a little too tightly. I smiled. "What do you think, Claire? Did I hear something I wasn't supposed to?" She swallowed hard, and for the first time since this began, I saw it true, unfiltered fear flashing behind her eyes. It was fleeting, but it was there, and it was beautiful. She opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. "Actually, you know what? Don't answer that," I said, standing up. "I think I already know." I walked upstairs without another word, leaving her sitting there, gripping her phone, her breath uneven. I could almost hear her thoughts, the frantic way she was trying to put the pieces together, trying to figure out just how much trouble she was in. She would try to get ahead of this, I was sure. She would run to Matthew. She would try to fix it, but it was too late. She had already lost. She just didn't know it yet. For the next few days, I let Claire writhe in her own paranoia. She thought she was the one in control. She thought she still had time. But what she didn't realize was that the game was already over. I was just enjoying watching her scramble before I delivered the final blow. I spent the next few days pretending to be distracted, distant, not cold, just absent-minded, like a man too buried in work to notice his wife was acting strangely. It worked. She grew bolder, desperate. She started stepping out for errands more frequently. She stayed late at the office, claiming deadlines were keeping her at work. And of course, she was texting more. She thought she was being clever about it, holding her phone at just the right angle, tilting the screen away from me, clearing her notifications before setting it down. But she underestimated me. I had already anticipated every move she'd make. So I took the next step. I borrowed her phone one evening, an innocent request. "Hey, my battery's dead. Can I use yours for a second?" A simple ask, one that shouldn't have made her panic. And yet, the color drained from her face. She hesitated just a fraction of a second too long before forcing a smile and handing it over. She had already deleted anything incriminating, but she had forgotten something important. Her search history. While pretending to check the news, I swiped over and scrolled. And there it was. Multiple searches. Can your spouse track your phone without your permission? How to tell if your phone is being monitored. Best ways to delete messages permanently. She was trying to cover her tracks. I almost laughed. Instead, I handed her phone back, my expression neutral. Thanks, I said. Her fingers were trembling as she took it. No problem. I walked away, letting her think she had dodged a bullet, letting her think she had time to fix things. But time was something she didn't have. That weekend, I laid the next piece of the trap. Hey, I was thinking we could go away for a couple of days, I said at breakfast, buttering my toast. Just you and me. A little reset. Claire blinked at me, startled. Oh, when? This weekend. She hesitated, just slightly. I don't know. Work's been crazy and... I smiled. Come on. You've been working so hard. You deserve a break. She licked her lips, eyes darting down to her phone. She was stalling, because she already had plans. Plans she wasn't willing to cancel. Daniel, I just don't think I can. Is it work? I cut in smoothly. Or something else? She flinched. Just barely. But I caught it. She forced a laugh. Of course it's work. What else would it be? I took a slow sip of coffee, letting her words settle, letting the tension hang thick between us. Then, I set my mug down and leaned forward slightly. You know, Claire, I said, my voice impossibly soft. If there's something you need to tell me, now's the time. She stiffened, her hand gripping the table. I saw the battle play out behind her eyes. Tell the truth, or keep lying. She chose the wrong option. There's nothing to tell, she said. I nodded slowly, then leaned back. Okay, that was it. Just one word. But the way her entire body locked up told me she felt the weight of it. She knew she had just stepped onto a sinking ship, and she had no idea how to swim. I followed her that Saturday. I had already seen the texts, the ones she thought she deleted. I had already checked the call logs. And now, I just needed to see it with my own eyes. So when she kissed me that morning, telling me she had to run errands, I simply smiled and told her to drive safe. Then I waited 5 minutes, grabbed my keys, and followed. She wasn't heading to the store. She wasn't going to work. She was driving straight to a hotel on the other side of town, and Matthew was waiting for her. I watched from my car, parked a safe distance away, as she stepped out, smoothing her dress, checking her reflection in the window before walking inside. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look around. She had done this before. She knew the way. Something in my chest twisted, but I ignored it. This wasn't the time for emotions. This was the time for action. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and reached for my phone. I opened my camera, and I pressed record. I didn't confront her that night. No, that would have been too easy. Instead, I waited. I let her come home. Let her kiss me like she wasn't just in another man's bed. Let her pretend everything was fine. I let her think she had fooled me. And then, over dinner, I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen, and slid it across the table. She frowned. What's this? Just watch, I said. She hesitated, then picked up the phone. And as soon as the video started playing, her face drained of all color. I watched as she saw herself, stepping out of her car, fixing her hair, walking straight into that hotel. I watched as she saw Matthew waiting for her. I watched as her mouth parted, as her breathing grew uneven, as she realized, too late, that the game was over. She dropped the phone as if it burned her, her hands trembling. Daniel, I leaned back in my chair, tilting my head slightly. How long? I asked, my voice eerily calm. She swallowed hard. Don't lie, I warned. Not now. Not when I have proof. Her lips trembled. 6 months, she whispered. I exhaled slowly, nodding. Wow, I said, almost to myself. 6 months. She reached for my hand. Daniel, please. I pulled back. She flinched like I had slapped her. Was it worth it? I asked. Was he worth this? Tears welled in her eyes. I never wanted to hurt you. I let out a bitter laugh. You didn't mind doing it, though. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time in this entire game, she had nothing left to say, and I had never felt more satisfied. Claire sat frozen, her eyes locked on the phone screen, as if staring at it long enough would make the damning evidence disappear. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I just watched her chest rise and fall in short, uneven breaths. Watched her lips tremble as she tried to form words that wouldn't come. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Then, finally, she whispered, "Daniel, please." I raised an eyebrow. "Please what?" She swallowed hard. "Please don't do this." I tilted my head, pretending to consider her words. "Do what, Claire?" My voice was eerily calm. "Ask my wife why she's been screwing another man in hotel rooms for the past 6 months." She flinched at my words, like they had physically struck her. Good. She deserved to feel something close to the pain I had been carrying. She let out a shaky breath, wiping her hands against her lap, like she was trying to get rid of an invisible stain. I didn't mean for it to happen. I let out a humorless chuckle. "Oh well, that changes everything." She blinked rapidly, her hands trembling. "No, I never planned for this. I swear. I love you, Daniel. I never stopped loving you." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. Just so we're clear," I said slowly. "You loved me while sneaking off to a hotel to be with another man? That's what you're saying." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She knew there was no way to spin this, and that was exactly where I wanted her. I took a deep breath, exhaling through my nose. "You know what's funny, Claire?" She didn't answer. I smirked, sitting back in my chair. "You weren't as careful as you thought you were." Her eyes widened. What?" I gestured toward the phone. "You thought deleting texts and clearing your call logs would be enough, but you made a mistake." I let my words settle, watched as her mind raced to figure out what she had missed. And then I delivered the final blow. "You forgot about your search history." She paled. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, then slid it across the table toward her. She stared at it, her breathing growing heavier by the second. "Go on," I said. "Read it." Hesitantly, she unfolded the paper. Her eyes flickered across the words I had printed out, the Google searches she had frantically made in the past few weeks. "Can your spouse track your phone without your permission? How to delete messages permanently. Signs your partner is suspicious." Her hand shook so violently that the paper almost slipped from her grip. I leaned forward again, dropping my voice to a near whisper. "Tell me, Claire, why would a faithful wife need to look any of that up?" Her entire body sagged like I had sucked the life out of her. She knew she was cornered. Her mouth opened and closed, her fingers clenching around the edges of the paper like it was her last lifeline. I could see it in her eyes. She was breaking. Good. The tears finally came. Big, fat drops that slid down her cheeks as she buried her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she choked out between sobs. "I am so sorry." I watched her for a moment, then sighed. "No, you're not." Her head snapped up. "I am." I shook my head, cutting her off. "You're sorry you got caught." More tears spilled down her face. "Daniel, please. I never wanted to hurt you." I let out another bitter laugh. "Oh, spare me." She flinched. I stood up, towering over her. "You didn't just hurt me, Claire. You made a choice. Every single time you went to him, you made a choice." Her shoulders shook as she sobbed. "It was a mistake." I scoffed. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk from a store." This was a 6-month-long betrayal. She was silent. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling sharply. "I need to know something, Claire." She wiped at her face with shaking hands. "Anything." I stared at her, my voice dangerously quiet. "Did you ever plan on telling me?" She sucked in a sharp breath, her mouth parting, then closing. That hesitation told me everything. I nodded, feeling an eerie sense of calm wash over me. That's what I thought. More tears, more trembling lips. I held up a hand. "Don't." She shut her mouth instantly. I turned away, pacing to the other side of the room. For the first time in weeks, I felt free. Claire had spent months thinking she had the power, thinking she was in control of this twisted secret. But now I was in control, and she knew it. I could feel her eyes on me, waiting, terrified of what I was going to say next. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I smiled. Slowly, I turned back to her, hands in my pockets. "Here's what's going to happen, Claire." She swallowed hard, nodding slightly. "You're going to pack a bag," I said, my voice disturbingly calm. "And you're going to leave." Her breath hitched. What? "You heard me." I took a step closer. "I want you out of this house." She started shaking her head, panic flashing across her face. "No, Daniel, please, we can't." "No, Claire." I cut her off. "You did this, not me." Tears streamed down her face. "We can fix this. We can go to therapy. We can." I let out a dark chuckle. "Therapy?" I gestured toward the phone. "You think some therapist is going to erase this?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, shoulders shaking. I exhaled, shaking my head. "Get out, Claire." She didn't move. I clenched my jaw. Now, finally, after a long moment, she pushed back her chair and stood. She was still sobbing as she walked past me, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold herself together. She stopped at the staircase, glancing at me one last time. "I still love you," she whispered. I tilted my head, considering her words. Then, with an emotionless expression, I simply said, "I don't." Her face crumpled, and she turned, disappearing up the stairs. And for the first time in months, I felt nothing but satisfaction. Claire packed her bags in silence. I stood in the kitchen, listening to the faint rustling upstairs as she moved around, shoving clothes into a suitcase. There were no more excuses, no more desperate pleas, just quiet resignation. She knew this was over. I leaned against the counter, sipping a glass of bourbon, feeling the weight of the moment settle over me. This wasn't how I thought my marriage would end. Not with secrets, not with betrayal. But here we were. Claire came down the stairs, her suitcase rolling behind her, her face pale and tear-streaked. She stopped a few feet away from me, gripping the handle so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I don't know where to go," she whispered. I took another sip of my drink, watching her. "Not my problem." She flinched. Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to continue. "I know you hate me." I set my glass down, tilting my head slightly. "I don't hate you, Claire." Hope flickered in her eyes for half a second. Then I added, "I just don't care about you anymore." She inhaled sharply, her fingers trembling around the handle of her suitcase. "Daniel," I sighed. "What do you want me to say? That I forgive you? That I'll wake up tomorrow and pretend none of this happened?" I shook my head. "It doesn't work like that." Tears welled in her eyes again. "I made a mistake." I let out a cold chuckle. "No, Claire. You made choices. Over and over again. Don't stand here and pretend this was a one-time accident." She wiped at her face, her breathing uneven. "Do you really want me to leave?" I stared at her for a long moment, and then, in the calmest voice I had ever spoken, I said, "Yes." Claire's shoulders sagged, her entire body folding in on itself. But she didn't argue. She nodded, wiped away another tear, and turned toward the door. She hesitated for just a moment, her fingers hovering over the doorknob. "You'll always be the best thing that ever happened to me," she whispered. I exhaled through my nose. Too bad I can't say the same. Her breath hitched, and then she opened the door and walked out. I didn't watch her leave. I didn't wait to see if she looked back. I just picked up my drink and took another sip, listening to the sound of the suitcase wheels rolling down the driveway. And then, just like that, she was gone. For the first time in months, the house was quiet. No more fake laughter. No more whispered phone calls. Just silence. And God, it felt good. I sat in the living room, staring at nothing, letting the moment sink in. I had spent so long waiting for this, planning for it, making sure she felt every ounce of guilt, every second of the walls closing in. And now it was over. I should have felt empty, but I didn't. I felt free. Claire was out of my life. Matthew was nothing more than a pathetic stain in my past, and I was done playing the fool. A few weeks passed. Claire tried reaching out once, an email, a weak attempt at closure. I didn't even open it. Matthew quit his job not long after. I never saw him again. Jessica, his ex-wife, and I met up once for coffee. Not out of romance, just shared wounds. She was moving on, and so was I. One night, I stood on the back porch, staring up at the stars, feeling the cold air settle into my skin. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about anything. No suspicions, no paranoia, no lies, just peace. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and let it all go. The past, the betrayal, the weight of everything that had been dragging me down. It was over, and I was finally free.